Hey friends, today's devotional is inspired by the chapter Heralds of the Morning in our series based on the book The Great Controversy. Heralds of the Morning really is a warning against indifference towards Christ's return. And if you happen to be a Seventh-day Adventist, which I am, I want to just give us a quick reminder that the word Adventist simply means that we can't wait for Jesus to come again. That Jesus' soon return really is a huge theme of our daily lives. It's the thing that ought to bring us the most joy, to be able to see Jesus come again. And especially with the things that are going on all around us. Not just talking about the pandemic that is taking place, but if you've been paying attention to politics and what is taking place in our country, with politicians seeking to take more of our freedoms. And I don't want to belittle the seriousness of it or the tragedy of it, but something about knowing that one of these days that we're going to look up and see Jesus coming in clouds of glory, it has a tendency to make the tragedy around us more bearable, if you will. And so I want to talk about Christ's soon return. I want to talk about a little bit what it means to be a herald of the morning, what it means to be a Seventh-day Adventist. But let me begin by a confession. I want to confess to you that as a young child growing up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I was presented with the doctrine of Jesus' soon return with great joy. And when I say great joy, I mean coming from the Sabbath school teachers, coming from the preachers, coming from my family members who shared with me about Jesus' soon return. And let me tell you, they did a good job. They really did. They did a great job of presenting it in a wonderful light, in a way that ought to have sparked joy in the heart of every young person. My problem was that I was afraid of Jesus' coming. I was afraid of not being counted worthy of going to heaven. I was afraid of being passed over when Jesus came again. In fact, I even had bad dreams about it. I would have this reoccurring dream, maybe a few times a year, where the second coming was happening. Jesus was returning to take us home. And in those dreams, I was left behind. I didn't get to go in those dreams, which of course increased my anxiety, increased my fear of the coming of Jesus. And I wasn't quite sure what to do about that. In the chapter Heralds of the Morning, we are warned about treating the second coming with indifference, or even avoiding thinking or dwelling or studying that topic altogether. But there's a couple of reasons that I found that were pointed out in that chapter as to why someone would either fear or treat the second coming with indifference. One of those reasons is other worldly pursuits that would distract us from looking forward to Jesus. It could be just, working towards wealth, seeking towards the treasures and the things that we could gain, or maybe experiences, whatever the worldly pursuit might be that could distract us from Jesus or wanting his return. And the other reason is because we're simply afraid of Christ's soon coming, just like I was as a child. Okay, so the worldly pursuits, whatever it is, whether it's some sort of, maybe it could be as simple as a hobby, something that you just love doing and love pursuing. Maybe it's the desire for fame. Maybe it is, the age-old one that we like to pick on, and that is riches and treasures and wealth and these kinds of things. And nothing wrong necessarily with any of these things in themselves, but Jesus does warn us in Matthew chapter 24 that in the days of Jesus' soon return, people will be eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage to the point that they are distracted and they're not really looking forward or preparing for his coming. Nothing wrong in any of those activities in themselves, but when they become a distraction, that's where the danger sets in. Fear of his coming usually comes from a feeling of not being prepared, not being ready, maybe not fully trusting in the grace of God, or maybe you have some sort of sin that you cherish, or maybe you've committed some sin in the past and you're not sure you've been forgiven for it. It could be any of these things. It could be something else that I haven't mentioned. But I find that reasons for not desiring Jesus' coming often falls in one of those two categories: distraction by worldly pursuits, or simply fear of your unpreparedness. And for me, it really was the latter. I really feared because I didn't feel prepared, and maybe it was because I didn't really know how to feel prepared. So we fast forward till I was 17 years old, and I was on a mission trip to the Philippines. And some of you have heard this story. You know, there was a late night where I had gotten in trouble, and I went to my room where all the guys were sleeping, and they were already asleep. I had gotten back late, and there I cried out to God, you know, out of frustration, because one of the reasons why I went on this mission trip was because I thought, here's my opportunity to maybe turn my life around, maybe some of this Christianity stuff that I had been avoiding for a few years at that point. I hadn't stepped foot in a church in a while even, but yet here I am on this mission trip, hoping that religion would kind of rub off on me, you know, by hanging out, rubbing shoulders with sponsors, the chaperones on the trip, my friends that did take Jesus seriously. I thought, hopefully maybe this stuff will catch on. And as I found myself getting in trouble and getting into mischief over there and really not being there for the right reasons, I was disappointed. I was disappointed in myself. I was disappointed in the process, maybe thinking that maybe it's not going to happen for me. Maybe I am going to kind of be an outcast. And I remember crying out to God that evening. And I remember God bringing it to my mind, just a handful of things, you know, the decisions I was making in my life, and not necessarily for the sake of the decisions in themselves, but really what all these things represented. You know, at that time I was hoping, my aspirations were for my band to really make it in the music world, and that we would become famous, and that I could earn a living, that it would support me and my family, not just support us, but support us very comfortably. And I wanted to be great at it. And I devoted all my time to it. My band and I, we practiced every single day and for many, many hours. And on the weekends, we would basically practice all day. We loved it. We were obsessed with it. And when we weren't practicing together, we were writing music on our own time and these kinds of things. And I remember God really bringing it to me in the Philippines. And after trying so many things, reading different books, trying to get into the habit of studying the Bible, but nothing was really catching. And God really made me face head on the real question that was the tipping point, that was really holding me back from loving Christ's soon return, from really becoming a real Christian, from really being transformed and being converted. And that was the question, is Jesus really my top priority? And I know that sounds really simple, and I know that sounds maybe a little too obvious. And I was aware of that question before, but I was really facing it head on that evening, like I'd never faced it before. It was like God finally had my attention for me to really slow think this through and take inventory of my life and ask, would my life be different if Christ was really my top priority? You see, friends, if you're struggling with indifference, if you're saying to yourself on day in and day out, even during this pandemic where you're really forced to consider your life more carefully and consider whether or not you're ready for Jesus to come again and whether or not you love it, and you find yourself maybe thinking, man, why can't I get fully excited about it? Why do I still feel anxiety about it? And whether it's fear or distraction, I would say to you, I was tempted to come at this devotional with maybe some tips and tricks. Maybe if you spent this much time with the Lord, or it's about getting to know Jesus, and maybe read this book or that book, and all of those things are true. But to be honest, I had all those tips and suggestions thrown at me too, as a 17-year-old or as a teenager, all throughout my high school years, and I really wanted it. I really did. I wanted what Jesus had to offer. But the tipping point really boiled down to this. And if you don't have this, all the other things are just going to frustrate you. You'll pursue a new devotional type of book or routine. You'll take on maybe new practices. You'll whatever, in your way of pursuing God. But I would submit to you that the tipping point really comes down to a mindset and a heart set. If this adjustment hasn't been made in the heart, everything else will probably be frustrating, because it may lead to disappointment and failure. The tipping point comes in your answer to the question, is Jesus my absolute top priority? Is pursuing God and serving Him the most important thing in my life? Are all the pursuits, in my life, are they subservient, or are they lesser than, my priority of Jesus? And I believe Scripture really confirms what I'm telling you today. Revelation 14, the Seventh Adventist proclamation to the world, it really comes in following our own advice. And our advice in Revelation 14 says this, and I'm just going to read you the message of the first angel, which says, "Fear God and give Him glory, because the hour of His judgment has come. Worship Him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." What does that word worship mean? It means, is God the top priority in your life? I really believe that it doesn't really come down to what method of pursuing Jesus you take on, what devotional or what study or what Bible study topic that you take on, or what your study habits are. It's important to have those things, but really they are in vain if that heart decision hasn't been made. And let me tell you something. That night, I couldn't answer that question in the affirmative. I knew Jesus wasn't my top priority, but I cried out to God to become my top priority. I knew that in my own power, I couldn't make Jesus number one. I knew that in my sinful heart, that was a bit of a difficult task. But I cried out to God. I said, God, you've got to do this in my heart. You've got to do this in my life. Transform me. And I tell you what, today, Jesus' soon return does not spark anxiety in my life and in my heart. I mean, there are times probably when it does, and that's just moments where I'm reminded, oh, hey, I need to refocus. I need to get right back on the path. But I tell you what, friends, when my heart is in that place, man, there's nothing sweeter than the idea of Jesus' soon return. So, friends, that's my encouragement to you all. Take moments, maybe take a good long moment, prayerfully considering this question. Is Jesus my top priority? Is my heart tuned really to worship Him, to make Christ first, last, and best in my life? So I leave that with you, hoping and praying that God can take you to a place where that question can be answered in the affirmative. Yes, Jesus is first, last, and best in my life. And friends, I tell you, when that is the case, you will love Christ and His coming. All right, friends, God bless you. Have a happy week.